talk afterwards for sure. You asked about the Son of Man. You said he's not calling himself the Son of God. He's calling himself the Son of Man. I'm emphasizing to you, my friend, when this hit me, again, while I was practicing Islam, when this hit me, it hit me like a bolt of lightning. The claim Son of God, according to Jews at that time, was not anything divine. Adam was called the Son of God. Solomon was called the Son of God. In the Psalms it says, you are gods. It's not a divine claim to call someone a son of God. But when someone refers to that Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, who's going to receive glory, authority, and sovereign power, and people of every nation and language are going to worship him with the worship due only to God, that Son of Man is more than just a human. He is divine. He's going to be worshipped by all people of all time. So when Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, it's not the Son of God title. And lots of Christians get this wrong, so I'm not pointing the finger at you. Lots of Christians say, oh, Son of Man means he's human, and Son of God means he's God. No, it's the other way around. In the Jewish context, Son of God was a normal human title. Son of Man, from Daniel 7, that was something divine. Go back and read Daniel chapter 7. See that this man is worshipped by all people from all eternity. This man, or one who looks like a human anyway, is worshipped by all people alongside of God the Father. That's the one Jesus is claiming to be. Definitely understand that point that I'm trying to make. And so when you see that Jesus' claim is found there in Mark 14:62, it's found in all the Gospels, and every time Jesus uses the term Son of Man, he's alluding to that. You cannot extract that from the Gospels. So please put Mark 14:62 next to Daniel chapter 7 and see what Jesus is claiming for himself. And we'll talk afterwards for the rest. Lord bless you, my friend. We'll take one last question.
Okay, so we heard Nabeel Qureshi and the points he brings up. Daniel 7 is talking about the Son of Man coming in the right hand of power. Jesus is allegedly affirming divinity using Daniel 7. The Son of Man term implies divinity. Son of God term implies humanity. And Jesus was, the Daniel 7 implies worship. Thus Jesus must be God because he was worshipped like Daniel 7 prophesied. Let me go into Daniel 7 first. Now, what is Daniel 7 talking about? It's not talking, and I can't emphasize this enough, Daniel 7 is not talking about Jesus in any way, shape, or form, because if you read the context, Daniel 7 is like Isaiah 53. They both portray the faithful people of God as a single person. The vision of Daniel speaks of the dominion given to the saints of the Most High. Daniel 7 says, then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. This has not happened yet. This has not happened yet. It's a future event. So Daniel 7 is not talking about Jesus. It's talking about the future people of Israel following their version of the Messiah. And we know that reading according to the Old Testament, Jesus did not fulfill the Old Testament version of messianic prophecies or messianic expectations. So so basically Daniel 7 is talking about a future event, but it's not talking about Jesus, because we know that Jesus did not fulfill any kind of messianic prophecies. But regardless, let's go into his claim about the Son of Man term. Now, what does the Son of Man term mean? What does that mean? And is that concept just unique to Daniel in the Gospel of Mark, or what Jesus says about himself? And the answer is no. Son of Man is a rather common term in the Bible. And what does a Son of Man means? It means man. It emphasizes the humanity of a person and not the divinity. So when Nabeel Qureshi says Son of Man is implying divinity, no, it isn't. It's implying humanity. It implies the humanity of a person. How do we know this? We just look at just read the book of Ezekiel. In the case of Ezekiel was referred to as the Son of Man. Ezekiel chapter 2 verse 1, Ezekiel chapter 3 verse 1, Ezekiel chapter 4 verse 1, Ezekiel chapter 5 verse 1. So Ezekiel was considered the Son of Man. What does that mean? It means God is God and Ezekiel is the Son of Man, or Ezekiel is emphasizing his own humanity. So when Jesus is saying he's the Son of Man, Jesus is emphasizing his humanity, not his divinity. So Nabeel Qureshi is just dead wrong on the concept of the concept of the Son of Man. He's right about the Son of God concept. He said, well, the Son of God doesn't mean you're God or divine, it means you're a human. He's absolutely right, because if you read the Gospel of Luke, Adam is the Son of God. If you read Psalms chapter 2, verse 7, I believe, David is considered the Son of God. If you read further in the Old Testament, Jacob is the Son of God. Israel is the Son of God. Solomon is the Son of God. Job, in the book of Job, angels are the Son of God. So the Son of God term does not imply divinity, it implies humanity. Same thing with the Son of Man term. It implies somebody's humanity and not their divinity, as we see in Ezekiel chapter 3, verse 1, Ezekiel chapter 2, verse 1, Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 1, and etc., etc., in Ezekiel chapter 5, verse 1. So, Son of Man just means like it's emphasizing humanity. It's not emphasizing divinity. Uh, so now notice if you read the book of Ezekiel, God addresses Ezekiel as the Son of Man. The prophet Ezekiel could not help but realize his own humanity and limitations in the face of God, in the face of God's glory. So when God is saying Ezekiel is the Son of Man, he's emphasizing his humanity. Then the concept is repeated in the New Testament when Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man. He's referring to himself as a human, or is emphasizing his humanity, not his divinity. Just like in Ezekiel chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, or chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5, where God addresses Ezekiel as the Son of Man. So that emphasizes the humanity and not the divinity. What about worship? Now, this is kind of a this is the part where Nabeel Qureshi did not read the Old Testament properly, because when people are worshiping somebody in New Testament and Old Testament times, that means they're paying respect or homage to that person. Uh, so they're paying respect to the person they're worshiping. It does not imply worship in the Bible does not imply that the person has any kind of divinity or divine authority. It just means these are people who are so holy and righteous that they need to be paid respect to. And that's why people of the Old Testament worshiped prophets like Daniel, etc. We read in Daniel chapter 2, verse 46, the king Nuzarbucker worshipped or fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that the offering and incense be presented to him. Other translations like the English Standard Version of the Bible translates Daniel chapter 2 verse 46 as saying, then King Nuzarbucker fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel. So King Nuzarbucker paid respect to Daniel. A Berean Standard Bible. At this, King Nuzarbucker fell on his face, paid homage to Daniel. So when King Nuzarbucker is falling on his face or is worshiping Daniel, he's paying respect to him, and he's not worshiping him as you worship some divine entity. He's respecting a human to pay respect to him. So when people are worshiping Jesus in the New Testament, same concept here. They're respecting the holiness, or they're paying respect to the figure of Jesus. They are not worshiping a divine entity or a divine figure. They're paying respect to the holiness or the righteousness of Jesus. When King Nuzarbucker worshipped or fell on his face, fell prostrate to Daniel, he's paying respect to Daniel, or he's paying some kind of homage to Daniel. It doesn't imply like you worship like God. You know, if you read the Old Testament, worship meant paying respect. It doesn't mean worship as in worshiping as the way you do when you worship a divine entity like God, etc., etc. So it's a very Old Testament. It's a very Old Testament practice when people worshipped other humans. It was to pay respect or homage to them, and not worship them the same way you worship God. So when the disciples in the Gospel of Matthew and and other places are worshiping Jesus, they're paying respect, or they're paying homage, they're paying respect to Jesus, and that worship is different from worshiping God. Because if you read the Gospel of Luke, if you read the ending of the Gospel of Luke, let me pull that up right now. Oops, let's see here. So if you read the ending of the Gospel of Luke, it says, then they worshipped, the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, verse 52 to 53. It says, then they, the disciples, worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy, and they stayed continually at the temple praising God. So notice how, after Jesus' ascension, they go to the temple, they stay at the temple, and they praise God. So now notice what the verse says, Gospel of Luke chapter 24 verse 25, and they stayed continually at the temple praising God. So what that means is the Gospel of Luke chapter 24 verse 53 is saying that these people worshiped God separately than they had a separate worship service for God than they did to Jesus. Because notice what verse 53 says, and they stayed continually at the temple praising God. It doesn't say they stayed at the temple praising Jesus. No, they praised God in the temple. That means the disciples believed that God deserved praise and worship differently than what than what they were doing for Jesus. So what that means is that according to the Gospel of Luke, they were worshiping God in a different way than they were worshiping and praising Jesus. So these are two different ways of these are two different worships that the disciples gave to Jesus and God. So they worship God and Jesus in different ways, according to the ending of the Gospel of Luke. Regardless, worshiping does not imply divinity or imply that somebody is divine, because then you have the problem of Daniel chapter 2. One second, let me get to that. Let me get to it right now. You have the problem of Daniel chapter 2, verse you have the problem of Daniel chapter 2 verse 46, where King Nusarbucker worshipped Daniel. That does not imply divinity. That implies respect, and respect to a holy figure, and not worship to a divine figure. So Nabeel Qureshi, well, he's dead now, but future Christians really need to read the Old Testament, because everything that happened to Jesus is repeated in the Old Testament, or was previously done in the Old Testament. That means that whenever people refer to Jesus as the Son of Man, or when Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man, or accepted worship, well, people of the Old Testament were called the Son of Man, and they received worship. So that doesn't mean that those figures are divine or like God. It just means those people were emphasizing their own humanity, and the people around Daniel and Jesus were respecting those figures, and they had a different way of worshiping God, as we see in the Gospel of Luke. So God worship is different in the Gospel of Luke than Jesus worship in the Gospel of Luke, and people were already doing that before Jesus. In the case of Daniel, when the king Nusarbucker worshipped Daniel to pay respect or homage to him, and not necessarily seeing him as some kind of divine figure. Stay tuned. More videos debunking Christian apologetics coming soon.